So thank you. I'm bringing Maria and Alpha back up on stage for the panel portion of the evening.
Okay, we're very excited about getting your questions. So as Dean Schmidtlein explained, we're going to be using the Poll Everywhere app to collect the questions that you have. So try to stump us here. Use your mobile device, share your questions with me and Alpha and Jay. And as your questions are coming in, I will start off with a couple of my own. So Alpha, let's start with you. How much uptake do you think there's going to be for the Climate Plus tool, and how much impact are you hoping it will have with the world?
So we're right now beginning in the educational setting. We're using the tool already in courses we offer at the Building Technology at the School of Architecture, but we're also incorporating it into an online course, which we hope would be used in all continents. So through that, I think we are slowly reaching out to the builders or architects or other professionals elsewhere. So I think where we would see the biggest need for construction, which would be where urbanization rate is very high in Africa and Asia, that's where we really hope and wish to see the biggest impact. And that's where we're going.
Great. Okay, Jason. What are some of the best ways that businesses can help world sustainability problems?
Sure. Well, what we see is that businesses first often pick the low-hanging fruit, the places where it's profitable to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because they're saving energy or waste in their buildings or in their logistics. And that's fantastic. We need that. The second thing is that it looks like about 80% of most companies' impacts are deep in their supply chain, at the first mile in farms and factories and fisheries and so on. And so getting traceability and visibility on that and tackling those impacts is a big one. And then the third, which is way too often neglected, is political influence. These solutions are technology solutions, they're management solutions, but they are also public policy solutions. And companies need to get active, asking for a carbon price, stable market signals that allow the market to really innovate and tackle climate and other issues.
Okay. Let's see. This can be for anybody. So what can we do as individuals to tackle climate change, from recycling to reducing waste?
I can. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, just a simple example could be thinking about how we use our set points in the house for heating or cooling. Or it could be about being mindful about closing and opening the windows at the right time, or adapting our clothing in terms of really how we go about our everyday. I think that really impacts at the aggregate scale, impacts how much energy we consume.
I think it's really important for people to look for what we call co-benefits, strategies that give you some benefit that you enjoy while tackling an environmental issue. A lot of people are buying Teslas because it's a fast car, right? As just one example, but I think, so another example is substituting video conferences for air travel. It's a less work-life balance strain on your family to be traveling, and saves the carbon on the flight. So I think that's a simple one. And then moving away from beef to other forms of meat and other vegetarian type diets turns out to have a bigger impact than most people realize.
Yeah. Okay, Jason, here's one for you. What countries do you see taking the lead in addressing the climate crisis, and is there something we can learn from them, based on maybe the deployment of your tool?
Sure. So that's a great question. There's a map that you can find on the web where you can look at the climate impacts and both sort of which countries are causing climate change and which countries are most affected by climate change. And so you can see the sort of injustice of the fact that the US emits a lot, Australia emits a lot, we're not that vulnerable relative to Bangladesh or Ethiopia that have very significant impacts, even though they're not emitters. But there's a couple of countries where there's simultaneously very large emissions and very large impacts, and I would put China squarely in the middle of that. So if I was going to just bet my money on where major climate solutions are going to come, I'd look at China. They're experimenting with carbon trading between provinces. They're investing seriously in the electric vehicles industries. And I think we'll see more. Now, I think that they're also at the same time building coal plants both inside and outside of their boundaries, investing in coal-fired generation around the world. And so, everybody's got a lot more to do.
Yeah, so let me just add on to the China situation. So China rightly claims that it wants to be at the lead and show leadership on the deployment of solar and other clean energy technologies. But the coal plants that they're building along the Belt and Road, which is their trade connection to
Exactly.
the rest of Asia and Europe, they're building coal-fired power plants, which the analyses of that indicate that it would stand to negate all of the gains that they're making in their renewable investments.
Yep.
And
actually, Japan is in a similar place where their own footprint is not bad, right? There's CO2 emissions per capita domestically, but their handprint in terms of their investments in coal technology outside the border is very substantial. And one of the things we did with the En-ROADS tool was I went to Tokyo and got to meet with some of the senior decision makers on energy policy for Japan to tackle exactly that question.
Yeah, and I think we don't want to call out China or Japan here because I think every country can look
Absolutely.
at what their strategy is, and we can always find places for improvement. But
we're Americans after all.
Yeah, no kidding. But but it's important to talk about it and to just indicate how challenging it is if you have a population that wants greater access to energy. And
Yes.
so in both these countries, that's an issue. Let's see. All right. All right. How about this one? As electric cars grow in supply and demand, I understand there's a big problem regarding the disposal of batteries in an environmentally friendly way. Can you please elaborate on where we are with this and how it could be more successful? Will the car industry catch up in time? So,
this is an area I don't know a whole lot about, but we recently had Yetming Chen from the Material Science Department come and speak to a group of our alumni who work in renewable energy finance. And he works on fundamental battery technologies. And we posed exactly that question to him about, what about the end of life of batteries? Is there a good recycling pathway? And he felt very confident that there were going to be good recycling pathways for most of the chemistries that we're currently working on. Now, he's somebody who's developing new battery technologies, so you can take that as you will, but I think he understands some of the fundamental chemistry and the economics of those chemistries reasonably well. But it's not something that I have expertise on.
yeah, so actually that was one of the points that I raised in my talk of using common materials as
Yes.
opposed to really rare materials that are toxic. So actually a great deal of the research that is going on in MIT's material science department and chemistry and chemical engineering is the replacement of toxic materials and toxic processes with processes and materials that are environmentally sustainable and environmentally friendly. Okay, and this is not limited to batteries, but this is a huge
Yes.
area of research.
Yeah, and I'll call out one other MIT scholar. Elsa Olivetti is a professor in material science and engineering who is one of the first people to kind of move up the ranks there, looking at what are called material systems. So looking at the life cycle analysis, looking at the flows of materials across their life cycle in order to be able to choose the right materials for their disposability, recyclability, and favorable characteristics at the end of life.
Yeah. Okay, so here's one for me. How do you get developing countries to skip the carbon step and develop using renewable energy and sustainable practices? So actually, it's interesting. We had 192 countries sign the Paris Agreement, which means that all countries, including the developing countries, want to be part of the solution and recognize their responsibility in being part of the solution. Okay. However, let's look at where we are on this. So, countries in the Western world grew economically prosperous by having energy to fuel their manufacturing growth. And this was largely fossil fuel energy. So developing countries want their people to have the same standard of living that the rest of the world has. And while they signed the Paris Agreement and they would like to have renewables and they want to have clean air, they are going to get their energy in the cheapest way that they can get their energy. So it is really incumbent upon the developed world to think about how we take these clean energy solutions that we're developing and to deploy them in these countries. So India, for example, is very coal-rich, and in fact, it's lignite, so it's just one step above peat. I mean, it's worse than bituminous coal in terms of the carbon intensity of it and in terms of emissions. And so, a big one of the when we started the Plan for Action for Climate Change, the Energy Initiative decided to change their portfolio over from going with individual investigator projects to a series of low carbon energy centers. And for the reason that we had to realize that there was going to be a transition in fossil fuels, carbon capture became an important part of that. But in all of these low carbon energy centers, our colleagues at MIGHTY invited in membership and representation from developing countries so that we could get an understanding of what their challenges are. Because sitting on the MIT campus, we don't know the challenge of somebody in India or Africa in terms of trying to get energy to their village. And so going out and reaching out to people in those areas to work with them, not just give them a solution, but work with them in terms of what is a kind of solution that is going to work in their particular area. And a lot of these solutions are going to have to be customized to the particular area. So that is a way that we are going about trying to solve that problem. Okay, let's see.
If I could just ask, I mean, Alpha, you mentioned doing work in Africa and Asia where there's rapid urbanization. Are you seeing uptake of some of these passive building technologies or green building technologies? What are those little leapfrog opportunities that exist?
There are two ways to look at this, I think, at the moment. For instance, the case in Addis, there is a need for a lot of construction. So people are really trying to build as much as possible. And there is no time to go back and think about what's passive or what's low energy, even though the climate is not really pressing. It's not really troubled with heating demand, or some places have cooling demand. So much is being built without thinking about it too much. But now I see a slight shift where some people are picking the interest. Okay, let's think about what's the difference between having a single pane window or a double glazing window. What's the effect? Even asking those questions and trying to understand the impact of each decision is yet picking up. But I see there is a huge space for further engagement and further research. Maybe to that end, I'd like to mention in April, we did a workshop in Ethiopia, a couple of us from our lab. We went there, we engaged with the university in Ethiopia. We made it a collaboration between MIT and Addis Ababa University. And we brought students and architects and people from the government to talk about these things. And it was still high-level conversation. Which was very indicative for us that we really would like to do more of that and really dive deeper into the details and understand further.
Yes. MIT's got great convening power to be able to bring people like that together. Yeah.
Okay, Alpha, here's another one for you. Is a 3D printed home more environmentally friendly?
That's a tricky question. Because there are usually two sides when we think about buildings. There is the embodied energy, which accounts for the energy we use or the emissions associated with the process and the materials used. And then there is the operational energy, which is associated with the performance of the building itself. So a very well-built building where we invested more and maybe we used a specific kind of material, then during operation it could be more efficient because it's not leaking air. It could be close to these net zero buildings or highly efficient. So in that regard, it would be we can design it in a way that it has a very well controlled indoor environment and it becomes more comfortable with little energy. On the other hand, we have to pay attention what kind of material did we use to produce the 3D printed material. The machines we use, even the material itself, that's directly involved. So I think we have to look into it in detail to identify. I don't think it's possible to say one or the other directly.
Okay, Jason, here's one for you. How do we scale up sustainable solutions when solutions such as recycled or bio-based plastics are more expensive than virgin materials? Mm-hmm. What's the right approach to encourage their adoption?
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a great book called The Green Bundle, which is a piece of research about marketing sustainability and when will people pay a premium for a more expensive product because it's greener or more responsibly made. And the thesis of The Green Bundle is that you have to be bundling the sustainability features with something that the customer wants. That's going to provide real value to the customer experience. Whether that's, I use the example of a Tesla car, just as a simple one, which is that it's fast, it's light, it's high tech, it upgrades itself overnight. Those are the things that excite the drivers, and by the way, it emits zero tailpipe emissions. So you have to design products intelligently so that you're really providing some benefit for the user. Nike learned this the hard way. They made a shoe called the Trash Talk, where they sewed together bits of old shoes, and it didn't sell because it wasn't providing any value to the athletes. But when they came out with the Flyknit, where they 3D printed essentially the upper of the shoe from a single thread, it's lightweight, it provides more breathability, it's a higher performance shoe for the athlete, and zero waste on the factory floor. So I think that's one critical strategy. The other is that there are some things where we just need public policy to sort of set product standards. The person who's running the coal plant is not excited about their scrubber for sulfur and nitrous oxide emissions, but they do it, and so we don't have acid rain and we don't have as much air pollution in the States because cap and trade for SOx and NOx got us there. So I think those are the two strategies.
Okay. All right, here's one that I'll take. Do you believe that the conversation around pushing more advanced technology distracts decision makers from leveraging current technologies to mitigate climate change? So it's interesting. So there are some people in the U.S., I don't really know if this is happening here, who are actually prominent people who are making statements that we have all the technology that we need to battle climate change. All we need is the policies. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so we don't really need to invest more in the technology. So of course we do need the policies. No doubt about that whatsoever. But the fact is we don't have the technologies that we use. So at the beginning of our climate action plan, we had a group of students who were protesting because they felt like our goals for the climate action plan were not sufficiently driving and ambitious enough. And actually, I agree with that. We need to really completely turn it up. But they demanded that the campus be carbon neutral by 2050. So we said to the students, okay, well, we don't know how to do that, but you can help us. So we put in a course on how to make the campus carbon neutral by 2050, and had different groups of students, we've taught this now 3 years, come up with strategies for getting to carbon neutrality by 2050. And so the renewables kind of level out at about 2030. You're doing, assuming you get better batteries, which we are making advances in that, between 2040 and 2050, you can't do any more to get to the last 15% of what you need. So every student group put either fission or fusion in to get you to the last part of it, okay? And we're not going to get there with current fission technologies. There are technologies actually in nuclear fission where that are molten salt reactors that if we develop them properly would actually use spent nuclear fuel rods as the fuel, and these reactors can't melt down. Okay, so you're actually solving two problems there. You have a reactor that can't melt down, and you're actually using the spent fuel rather than just burying it someplace that doesn't want to have it. And then on the fusion side, there have been different approaches to fusion. The one that the MIT startup is using is actually taking advantage of, there was a Nobel Prize given for high temperature superconductors in the late 1980s, but it is only now that physics discovery is being translated into developing developing magnets that have high enough fields to actually confine plasmas to the point where it looks like we could actually get a fusion device that will work, okay? So we can't get there without the new technologies. So MIT actually has been advocating, let's do as much as we can to try to positively influence policy while we're developing the technological solutions that are going to be needed to close that gap.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're now at the 5-minute point, and so I'm going to ask you both one final question on this topic before we move to the reception, and we'll be happy to take more questions because there's lots and lots of questions here. So all of you, both of you, have had a lot of contact with MIT students, and what are you hearing from them? And is this a priority in what they're studying? They have many different majors. Is a priority in their research, and how active are they on the campus about this? So Alpha, why don't you start us out here?
Sure.
You're one of them, but you have contacts with many others.
Definitely.
Are you typical?
No. For example, in our research group, most of the PhD programs tend to touch upon the effect on climate change or carbon emissions when they try to evaluate their solutions. So I think in the research, it's highly embedded, and in most of the courses that are offered in the building technology, that's usually one of the topics. In addition to that, I see student groups which are trying to get together and speak about these issues. I see more conferences every time. I myself was part of a competition, a very large competition, which was held a year and a half, which was interdisciplinary, and it was about changed climate, which had a huge impact, I think. It brought so many people together. So I at the institute level, I see so many activities going on, and what's fascinating for me is even more people take it personally, just like the first question that was raised here. Everybody's asking, what can I do personally? People, think about how they commute. I know so many people pay attention to what they eat, even when we, get food for conferences or for meetings. That's always in our minds. So I think it's really getting in the everyday life, and it's growing.
Great. Jason?
I mean, the populations that I have the most exposure to are master's level students from across MIT, because that's really the constituency that we serve with the sustainability initiative. So that's MBA students at Sloan, executive students around Sloan, dual degrees with engineering, urban studies and planning students from across campus. And what we've seen is just an incredible tailwind for work on sustainability. When we started the sustainability certificate, which is a kind of a master's, you can think of it as a minor for master's students across MIT. In 2011, we had 17 people finish it. And then last year, we had 55. So there's been very steady growth, largely owing to Bethany Patton, who's my colleague, who has led a lot of that student engagement work. And what we've seen is that core of people, so there's now 297 of them out in the world, are now a cohort of alumni who are coming back and bringing cool projects that are attracting more students to want to get involved. We know that about a third of Sloan students, as they're graduating, have taken 3 or more courses in sustainability. And so it really is a vibrant part of that master's level conversation. And they're all interested in the topics that we're talking about, the intersections between entrepreneurship and innovation and investment around new technologies, changing the way big existing corporations operate in their supply chains, and in these transformations of public policy and the public conversation about climate change and sustainability, and also the broader social issues of inequality, and sort of what they think of as sort of a socio-political unsustainability that makes it all the harder for us to tackle these big issues. So MIT is a very activated group of people. They're problem solvers, and they want to get on top of these issues in their careers and, as you said, in their personal action.
Okay, so we are unfortunately out of time here, but I want to thank you all for coming tonight, for the fantastic questions. And now I invite all of you to stay and join us for a reception downstairs. And of course, any of us will be happy to answer any of the questions that you sent in that we didn't get to. So thank you very much.